Welcome to everyone who's joined us today. This is our final webinar of the day, the LUPC SUPC COVID Impact webinars. My name is Marion Hutchins. I'm Head of Marketing and Communications for SUPC and the wider SUMS group. And it's really our pleasure to have you here today. It's been so great to see so many of you joining on. I know I can't see all of your faces, but I can see you joining nonetheless, and that's been really lovely for us. Just wanted to say a big thank you today to legal firm VWV, who are sponsoring today's program, along with providing expertise via several sessions this morning. For those of you that have joined us through every session for the day, we started off talking about public procurement notices and force majeure this morning, and had a Q&A panel that was really helpful, I think, in addressing some of those concrete contractual issues that people are coming up against. We then had a really uplifting session from SUMS consultant Fola Ikbahai on change management and how actually within our own realms we're all change managers. And then we're really icing the cake here with a session on personal resourcefulness and how we can all try and address some of the changes that are going on and cultivate the skills that we may need. So I think you're in for a real treat. As many of you will know, we had the in-person LUPC SUPC conference scheduled to take place the 30th of April in London. And of course, we were no longer able to deliver that to you in the usual way. So it was really important to us that we made sure that relevant content was brought to you in a timely manner. So this is part one, if you will, of LUPC SUPC conference material. And we're looking forward to delivering more material for you on the 30th of April. So keep an eye out in your inboxes for future invites and registration information for further content that's taking place on the 30th. So with that, I think I will hand over to Felicity, who along with two of her colleagues, will be taking us through this afternoon session and giving us a little bit of an update on what we need to do in terms of our Zoom technical features. Is that right, Felicity?
That's absolutely right. Thanks so much for the introduction, Marion. And we're really, really pleased to be able to come and run this session for you this afternoon. Really looking at the personal resourcefulness you need in times of change and how we build that individual resilience during COVID-19. Next slide, please, Grace. So by way of introduction, you'll have seen the biogs in the joining instructions, but I'm Felicity Gasparro. I'm an associate of SUMS Consulting, which means that I've got a broad level of experience across the university sector. But I am also the owner of a company called Oyster Outcomes Limited. And that organisation is a consultancy very much based on outcome-led thinking and looking at ways to achieve results and work with our colleagues and our clients to achieve results. We were very fortunate to be able to supply SUMS with coaching, supervision and mentoring services, and so by virtue of that we are able to extend that offer out to all of you today, and that's why we wanted to run this session to raise awareness, but also to give you an opportunity to really just spend an hour on yourself, because at the moment it's been pretty crazy, and we thought that it would be a good use of time to give you a slice of personal development investment, and see how that enables you going forwards. My two colleagues, Tim Bromfield and Helen Moreton, I've got their biogs up on the screen. You won't be able to read them because they're very detailed, but again, they're there for you to take away and have a look at. We have, as Oyster Outcomes, we have 12 associate coaches, all of whom are highly skilled professional coaches, several of whom hail from the John Lewis Partnership, which is by original sort of heritage and background. But we also have some academic coaches as well, so people who've worked in higher education. So a really nice balance and blend. And we'll talk later about how you can find out a little bit more about who you've got access to through SUMS and Oyster Outcomes. But Tim and Helen will be leading you expertly through the coaching session, and at the end we will then go through some Q&A. So if we could just have the next slide, please, Grace. So this session absolutely builds on Follows session, if you were there just half an hour ago, which gave you some practical ideas and strategies on successfully managing change, and will help sort of turn this into you as an individual. We have disabled the chat function on this session so that you can really focus on the coaching element, but we have enabled the anonymous Q&A function. So as Tim and Helen are guiding you through, I will be taking notes on the questions that are coming up, and at the end Tim, Helen and I will then have an opportunity to respond to them. The overriding objective of this session is to give you some new ideas and strategies to enable you to break down what resilience means to you and how resourcefulness can encourage resilience to grow, particularly at this time. What will we cover? So we'll initially look at some stories that are out there right now, one particular story which may interfere in our usual perception of resilience. We'll take some time looking into how we think and act in preparation for our coaching session. We'll then take you into a coaching session working on setting a personal and effective outcome. And for, again, anybody on Follows session previously, the theme of trust came up. And I think this really speaks well to that point. And then we'll field your questions on the Q&A. We're also going to give you some questions to go away and think about if you choose, and then I will summarise the session. So I hope that sounds good to you. We're really pleased to be with you today, and I'm going to hand over to Tim. Next slide, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Felicity. Hi, I'm Tim Bromfield. I want to start with spending a few moments taking you through an article I saw in the Guardian newspaper about 2 weeks ago. I wanted to cover it with you particularly because in amongst all of the, I suppose, statistics, the government advice, the quite alarming stories, I looked at the BBC website just before joining this session. I think all bar 2 of the stories on the main news page are about coronavirus. So I was particularly interested and struck by this article because it was, I felt, something really written from the heart by a journalist talking about how she was really feeling. So I thought it would be useful to start with it by looking at it in the sense of, I guess, really reflecting on what might be happening for all of us, for the people that we love and that we care for, and for the people that we work with. So I'm going to go through with you, and this is the first of 3 slides, so we'll spend some time on this one to begin with. I'm going to go through it first of all, just listening, I think, to a person talking, because it feels more like that than it does a newspaper article. And then I'll go through the same 3 slides after that, and I'll start to look at it more through the eyes, if you like, of a coach working with a client. So when we go through the second time, I'll ask you to kind of imagine that Suzanne Moore is a client working with me as the coach. But first of all, let's have a look at what she says in this article on the first page. It's interesting that she straight away starts talking about what makes us feel safe. And instantly also there's a recognition that while it might be self-delusional to be saying those kind of things, there is some comfort in that in the present climate, present conditions. And she moves broadly more on to talking about the world in general, and even, dare I say, risks a little bit of humour in all of this. Talking, and this is these are her words, not mine, the bizarre president of Belarus, who has advised drinking vodka and visiting the sauna as ways to stay healthy in the current crisis. So that's the first slide. So on to the second slide, please, Grace. And if we look at the second slide, what I think you're seeing here is Suzanne Moore really looking, yeah, maybe the world has always felt a little bit unsafe. Maybe we've had that kind of perspective. But she opens there with now the world really is unsafe and everything has changed. She starts to make what I receive as quite fundamental points about how things feel to her. And she also talks about private space being dangerous as well. And while it might be a sanctuary for some, it's a prison for others. And when this article was written 2 weeks ago, there hadn't been much mention in the media around this sort of concept of, you know, if you are in that kind of relationship, you're locked down with that person. It's now becoming more broadly reported, but she was onto this really quite early on. And at the bottom of this slide, she kind of reflects on that sort of dichotomy between, yeah, it kind of relies upon us, maybe in our own isolation, to be self-reliant, but actually there is a need to reach out to others as well, so quite conflicting. And on the final of these 3 slides, if we flick over to that one, what you'll see is some quite bold statements there. She says, the present is very difficult, but it's where we are, and it's unsafe. And she looks, it seems to me, to someone perhaps she's sought as a kind of a guide, someone to inspire in difficult times, a poet and novelist. And he's saying we should learn to love questions. We should look at them like locked rooms and like books written in a foreign language, really motivational perhaps. And at present, you need to live the question. But it ends on quite a hard point. Again, from the heart, from Suzanne Moore. But that's what is hard, very hard. So I just wondered whether, like me, you would receive that in the same way. It's nice, but kind of disconcerting at the same time to hear someone talking truly and honestly about how they feel. Yes, they're a journalist. Yes, they want to have people read their article and read their newspaper. But it's just, in a way for me, I find comforting to hear someone talk directly about how things are feeling for them. So that was my initial reaction to it. Be interested if it was yours too. And then I looked again at the same article, the same 3 slides, and I looked at them from the perspective of a coach working with a client. So for this, if you can come with me on this, I wanted to consider almost hearing her talk and her words coming alive. And this is her speaking to me and imagining her as a client working with me as her coach. So if we flick to the next slide, you'll see it's the same first one again, but this time I've highlighted some words and phrases in there. So we have things that I've highlighted there. And she talks about what makes us feel safe and what gives us a feeling of control. And then in the start of that second paragraph, I read it, if she was my client, as someone who's actually sharing with me quite a powerfully held belief. Before the virus, the world felt uncertain anyway. So as I listen to that as a coach, what I think I notice is that we all choose words. We choose the words that we use probably quite carefully. We might do it subconsciously. And in choosing those words, we choose not to use others. So there is something in the relationship of the coach with a client that is a lot about respecting the words that people use. And I know that when I'm working with a client, I listen very carefully to the words people use, and I don't paraphrase them. So I might only have short quotes to quote back to them, but it's absolutely vital to me when I work with a client that I quote those word for word. And I sometimes write them down so that I can do that. And there's something in that respect, because you are being drawn in as the coach, as we all are as listeners to people, into that person's world, what's important to them. And if we trample over their phrasing, it will jar with them, and you'll see that in a client's face. So we don't ever, as coaches, say what people mean by the words. We might repeat those words back to them and then ask the client to tell us what they mean to them, what's significant about them, why it's important to them. And in doing that, the aim of the coach is to help the client understand themselves even better than they already did. Perhaps to understand what's okay for them currently, what they're happy with and content with, and also to maybe look at those things where not so content. Actually, this is something that's a blocker for me. This is something I want to do more with, maybe want to change. And if we look at the next slide, again, it's the same one repeated, but this time with highlighting. So we just click over. There's another belief statement, I think, in the middle of that, and I've highlighted it. Suzanne Moore says, home is a sanctuary for some and a prison for others. Now, it would never be for the coach to disagree with that, but it would be for a coach to say, tell me more about why you believe that, what's important about that for you. Why do you hold that to be true? And in holding something like that to be true, it will influence your behavior. So it's a really useful thing to explore. And on the final of these 3 slides, if we just flick over to the last one again, I've just highlighted that word uncertainty. So another thing that coaches quite often do is listen very carefully to what people say and how they use words and how they use phrases and sentences. Sometimes unknowingly, we repeat the same words and the same phrases. You may have spotted me doing that as I'm talking to you now. But I see in there uncertainty. There's something about uncertainty that may be important. The only way I'll find out as a coach is to ask the client, and they will certainly be ready to tell me whether it is or whether it isn't. Now, before we move on to the next slide, I just wanted to share with you that I'm very fortunate in that I am a listening volunteer for the Samaritans. And that certainly is a privileged role to have, and it certainly does let you understand and hear what is important for people. And people share hugely and tremendously in that confidential space. And it's different to the coaching space, but there's a similarity in that it's safe and it's confidential. So I thought I would be safe to look at the Samaritans website and see what words of advice are on there. And it's interesting because if I had looked at the website and felt in a calm place, actually by the use of the phrases, I started to feel more anxiety. So if we just flick over to that next slide, have a look at it and see what your reaction is too. I think the intention behind it is to say these are the things that may be happening for you. And if you were to be able to read it without my highlights, perhaps those things wouldn't jump out so much and you would just think, yeah, that's a really helpful thing to understand. But if you start to read something that says you'll be feeling more worried and unsettled, things are changing, and lots outside of our control, there's lots of unknowns, it's natural there's uncertainty. So words are hugely important, and I'm quite relieved and quite pleased that at the end of that, the second bullet there, while we are physically isolated, and this is the piece I want us to take from it, and I'm sure the Samaritans too, it's more important than ever for us to stay socially connected. So try and reach out to people to talk and try and be there to listen to others. So fascinating. And later I'll look with you at another technique. But for the moment, thank you for your attention on that. And I'll hand over to Helen.
Thank you for that, Tim. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Helen Moreton. So we can see and hear the importance of language, whether we use that consciously or subconsciously. And we can also see and hear the unprecedented change and challenges that we're all facing into to different degrees. So before we move on to the well-formed outcome session, I want to take a moment to pause. A moment to stop all of the chatter that might be going on in our heads at this moment, and a moment to notice what we are noticing. So next slide, please, Grace. How we think and how we behave is often greatly impacted by what kind of mood we're in. If you're in a good mood, you know your thinking tends to be bigger, it's more dynamic, you're more excited, more flexible, and as a result, you're more energized and more productive. If you're in a less than positive mindset, the walls can close in. Your thinking and your circle of influence can shrink, and you're less able to face the challenges that the day might be throwing at you. But why is this? So we all have chemicals and neurotransmitters in our brain that impact how we feel and how we think in a particular moment. So I'll just name a few of them that I'm sure you're aware of. So adrenaline. The overall effect of adrenaline is to prepare the body to fight or flight, and particularly in times of stress. And I'm sure we've all experienced it, you know, that racing heart. I'll be honest, I'm having a little now because, of course, the adrenaline's kicking in as I'm speaking to you. And the blood pressure raises. We gulp more air into our lungs because we want to be more capable when we redistribute that blood to our muscles. And sometimes that can be helpful, but if we spend too much of our time in that place, it is absolutely exhausting. We're left feeling angry, anxious, ill at ease, distracted, and ultimately burnt out. Another chemical you've probably heard of is cortisol. It gets blamed for anxiety, high blood pressure, stroke, you name it. It actually does lots of good stuff in our body as well, such as regulating blood pressure and our metabolism. We do need cortisol, but sometimes we use it too much. Another one I'm sure you've all heard of is dopamine, that real good feel-good chemical within our brains. It accesses the pleasure and reward center within our brains, and it plays a vital role in how happy we feel, how able we are to deal with things at any given time. In addition to our mood, dopamine also affects our movement and our memory and our focus, and it plays a big role in how we think and how we plan and how we act. Serotonin helps regulate mood naturally. When our levels are normal, we feel happy and we feel balanced. And feeling balanced is so important to how we think and how we feel, and therefore how we act. It impacts every part of our body, from our emotions to our motor skills, and it helps us with sleeping and eating and digestion. It helps us feel relaxed and balanced. So for a moment, I want you to consider, where do you usually spend most of your time? Is it in a happy, relaxed, resourceful, resilient, calm place? Or is it in a place that is fast and anxious and unhelpful to you? Are you living your life at full speed? Or are you allowing yourself enough time to relax and recoup? Is the pandemic that we're facing in creating you lots of stress and anxiety? Or are you able to live in this moment and appreciate what positives there are around you? Perhaps a simpler way of life, more time with immediate family, less doing, more being. How are you choosing to frame this situation? How could you choose to reframe it? You can control these thought patterns and therefore the chemical balance within your brain through focus and practice. But how many of you are actually ever present in the moment in order to do that? So if we can just go on to the next slide, I'll share a lovely tweet with you. When I came across this tweet, it did make me chuckle. There's a guy in a coffee shop sitting at a table, not on his phone, not on a laptop, just drinking coffee, like a psychopath. If we do pause and take a moment to think, if we are mindful and in the moment, are we the odd ones? We are conditioned to rush about, to look busy, to always be up to something. Anything else than that is laziness, right? Wrong. I therefore start many of my coaching sessions with a moment to breathe and just to be there in the presence of somebody else. We do this to different degrees depending on what's going on for my clients at that time. But in order to have some really deep thinking, allow creativity, allow to pull on our resourcefulness, our resilience, and the brilliance that we hold within ourselves, we have to be in a calm and resourceful place. As I'm speaking to you now, are you actually listening to what I'm saying? Or are your thoughts taking you elsewhere? For a moment, I'd like you to pause with me. Take a moment to breathe and access your resourceful state. So we're going to go through just a little bit of mindfulness now. So there's no one watching you. Many of you will be at home alone watching this computer. So throw yourselves into it and just give this a go. You might do this often. You might never practice a moment of mindfulness. So let's begin by taking a moment to settle into our chairs. Find a comfortable position. Let your spine be long and let the natural curve be there. You can close your eyes or you can just relax them looking downward. Let your belly and shoulders relax. And this is really important. Place your feet firmly on the ground and feel the connection and feel the safety and security of this moment. Take a deep breath in for a few seconds and a long breath out. And as you take your next breath in, imagine breathing in all the energy and positivity, the gratitude that you have at this moment around you. And as you breathe out, let out any tightness or tension or anxiety. Again, breathe in warmth and openness, and breathe out tension and tightness. And as you're sitting there in your chairs, just notice if there is any tension within your body and just give it a shake off. Just let it go. And as thoughts wander into your brain, acknowledge them, but then let them go. Just take a moment to be here in this second. Another breath in and another breath out. And as we close this practice, I invite a little smile from you. And you can come back to this practice whenever you're feeling stressed or that you need just a moment of space and nourishment. I invite you to practice this over the next few days. Pick an activity that has a potential trigger for you, create stress for you, perhaps trying to work at home with the kids running riot in the background, or speaking to somebody you're not particularly looking forward to. And when you begin that activity, make a commitment to notice any of the stress, to acknowledge it, to stop, to breathe, to reflect, and to respond positively. So I hope you all did have a go at that at home. I appreciate it might be really different for some of you. But now that we've accessed a more resourceful and a more clear state of mind, I'm going to hand back over to Tim for the next session.
Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you. So, the well-formed outcomes technique. It's a technique that many of us as coaches use in our sessions with clients. And what I'd really encourage you to consider it as is a measure, self-measure really, a self-check way to kind of work through something that is something you really want to achieve, something maybe it's been on your mind for some time. And you may well be coming to this session with that in mind. If you've had a chance to consider an outcome that you've perhaps wanted to achieve but haven't yet been able to. And the well-formed outcome is kind of like a wheel, a structure that we can work through together. And you can do it on your own. You can absolutely do it on your own. I personally prefer doing it with a coach, and all good coaches are coached as well, because I know I can sometimes self-deceive a little bit and say, yeah, I've done that, when in reality, I may not be being entirely honest with myself. So if we flick to the next slide, we'll have a look at this little chart around, and I think Helen may have a few points to add, and I know she'll jump in when she does, because we've both used this. So there will always be an outcome. Let's just, I guess if I can ask you to accept that as a starting point, feel free to challenge later. But is it going to be well formed? If it's not well formed, then the chances of success with it are lessened. So where do we start with this? Well, we start on the next click. You'll see a bubble appear in the right-hand top corner. And it starts with a question which some coaches refer to, some people who have looked into this longer and deeper than perhaps even I have, as the ultimate question. What do I want? 4 simple words. But often we can struggle to know the answer to that question, and may find that coaching activity is the thing that really helps us to start to narrow down what that means. It's important always in this model to set it in the positive. So if you, for example, you were to say, I don't want to work here anymore, none of you would say that, I know, but if you were to say that, that's really not in the positive. It's talking about what you don't want rather than what you want. So if you said instead, I want a job that provides me with the opportunity to use my creative skills, straight away, you're phrasing it as a positive statement. And the likelihood then is it can be more clear and well thought through. And it's also useful to ask, and a coach to a client would always do this, what do you want to see, hear, or feel? Now, you might think, well, that's three ways of asking the same thing. And in a way it is. But some of us are more visual. So if we talk to someone about, so what do you want to see? They'll get that really quickly and be able to relate to that. Others are more auditory. And so what will that sound like when you've got there will be a useful phrase to use with them. Someone who is more operating through feelings, how will that feel? How will it feel when you've achieved what you've achieved? Using the one that most relates to you will be the one that's going to help most in accessing this. So that's where to start. Another one that's often referred to, and I throw it in just because it's often quoted, I want to give up smoking. Not a well-formed outcome. Again, it's not stated in the positive, and it's talking about what you don't want to do. So you have to visualize it to then not do it and get it back out of your head again. So it may be that you rephrase that as something like, I want to be able to run and have fun with my kids without feeling out of breath. Stated in the positive, much clearer. If we click onto the next bubble, we hear a lot about incongruence, what doesn't fit with us. This is about congruence. Does it fit with who I am and who I want to be? If it's so far different from the person that you are, yeah, you can still look and try and achieve that outcome, but is it really well formed? If you perhaps are a very shy and quiet person and your outcome is to perform a talking tour of the southern states of America, may not fit with you, may be less likely to happen. So each time you're checking in, is it well formed? Yes, it's an outcome, but is it well formed? And it's, if you think of the coach working with you or you self-coaching, the coach or the self-coaching you is your ally, someone who's going to help you on this path. They're not trying to catch you out with this approach. They are trying to help you to achieve what you want to achieve. So looking at that, we check it again. Does it fit with who I am and who I want to be? And we click again onto the next bubble. So in what context, where and with whom? Yeah, maybe self-evident, but are you talking about something you want to do at work? Are you talking about something you want to do in your home life? Or is it something that kind of permeates all of those things? But it's being clear and conscious of where it is that you want to achieve this. I do remember working with a client who told me that he wanted to be assertive in particular meetings. And then went on to talk about, I want to be assertive all the time. And my question was simply, all the time? Even when feeding the cat? Maybe not, but focus it on where you want to achieve it. And on to the next bubble. So what's in my control? Particularly useful in the working environment, because if it's not something that's in your area of authority or beyond your budget limits or whatever else, they're trying to set an outcome that you don't have full control over will be less likely to be successful. And the next bubble, please. So what does my present state do for me? And I imagine in a moment Helen might want to add something in here, but something that comes up quite a lot in work with coaching clients, because you're doing what you're doing and you've been doing it for a while, presumably it's giving you something. I don't know, Helen, would you want to add anything to that with the clients that you've worked with?
Yeah, I think sometimes people, whether they know it or not, are holding on to something. And so they are unwilling to let go of it, but they're not really sure why. It's giving them something. They're finding some light or some security or some form of happiness through what they're doing. So by unlocking it can be really helpful. And that's why the second question in, does it fit with who I am and what I want to be? The key words there around I, not what others might want or others might need to be. And so if we're really thinking about who we are in the moment and who we want to be, not because other people want us to be it, but because we want to be it, then that can help us unlock what it is that we want to move towards and what we're willing to let go of in order to get there for us, not for others.
Brilliant, thank you. And so on to the next bubble. So when it's achieved, what will it do for me? If you can't quantify that, that can have quite a striking effect on your resolve, your resolution to actually work towards this. And again, coming back to that center, is it an outcome that is well formed? If you cannot answer that question, the chances of it being well formed are less, and your chances of success in terms of getting what you want will reduce. And moving on to the next bubble. So what's important? Again, a simple question, self-explanatory. Can you answer it? If you can't, it perhaps needs more digging, more unraveling to find out what is important. And ultimately, it could also say, do you know what? This isn't what I want. And the well-formed outcome process has done a good job then of stopping you wasting time on something that actually you realize is not as important as perhaps you thought it was.
And I'm just wondering, Tim, as the people that are watching this video are working through these questions because they were asked to bring their own scenario.
Yeah, indeed.
How are you getting on with those particular questions? And when you've got to what is important, is that congruent? Does it fit with that very first question around what do I want? Do the two match up? Is what you want actually what's important to you? Or are you trying to fulfill some other need?
Brilliant. Thank you, Helen. That's great. That's great. Okay, so to the next bubble. So what has stopped me up until now? Again, a little bit related to that, what does my present state do for me? But this is a question I think that really encourages you to be honest with yourself. This is one where if I'm trying to self-coach, I'll be honest, I fall down on it because I can convince myself that yes, there's nothing really that stopped me when something has. In a coaching session, I often find asking this question can lead off into what may sometimes seem like tangents, but they can be incredibly helpful tangents because they might reveal a pattern of, yeah, I get to a point and then I don't do it because, and the answer to that can be really revealing. And again, Helen, I don't know, again, with your clients, any examples there, any experience of that I'm sure you've had?
Yeah, with what has stopped me up till now, what I often see from clients is that being something external to them. So it's my boss, it's my family, it's the upbringing I had, it's circumstance. But often when we get under those deeper levels of thinking and being, what we find out is what's actually stopped them quite often is themselves. It's a sense of belief in themselves or honesty with themselves about who they are and what they want to achieve. So normally we end up finding that it's not the external stuff that stopped them, although sometimes of course it can be, but it can be that internal stuff, that belief that they have in themselves, or the belief that they deserve better.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant stuff. Okay, so we'll flip on to the next bubble. So what effect will it have on others? Well, let's go back to that example about I want to be able to run around with my kids and not get out of breath. It may have the impact of when your partner comes home, you're not there to meet them, greet them, because you're out there running around with your kids. Now, that might sound like a flippant example, but any outcome that we are seeking to achieve is likely to have an effect on others. This question is really asking you to consider, so what effect might that be? It's asking you to go into this new place, this new outcome that you're heading for, in a conscious way. You know that actually it will have an effect on others. Is there anything I need to do there? Is there anything I need to explain or make clear to other people around me so that they're not going to be in any opposition to it and actually might feel very active in supporting me towards it? And to the next bubble. And what resources will I need? Well, in a work context, we might just think of budgets, money, whatever else, but resources take many, many forms. Resources include your time. Resources maybe say you were going to take an additional piece of study to get an additional qualification in the work that you did. More resources, more time, using holiday to study, things like that. You will need resources. So consider them is what it's asking. And to the next bubble. Is it worth it? That is a very good stop you in your tracks moment. Because if even after all this beautiful logic that's taking you around this well-formed outcome process, you look at the question, is it worth it? If you can't answer yes to that, then you won't do it. It won't be a well-formed outcome. It won't happen. So again, that honesty, that self-honesty, or the wonderful challenge in a safe, non-judgmental environment of working with a coach can be a great way of saying, is it worth it? Is it really? And if it is, you'll know, because the client will tell you in very, very clear and firm terms, oh my God, yeah, it's worth it. I want to do it. And again, your determination is a good self-audit of your determination to make this thing happen. So only a few bubbles left. We're nearly at the end of this process. Do jump in, Helen, if there's anything else before we get to that next bubble, which is coming up imminently. There it is. So secondary gains and losses, a little bit like what effect will it have on others, but you might see the initial gains and you might see some initial losses, but there might be some other things that aren't immediately apparent. Again, this is all about rigor. This is all about really testing it with yourself. Is there anything that may derail it? And the final bubble I think we've got, oh no, we've got 2 more, I think. How will I start and keep it going? That's a lovely one. Coaches and clients spend lots of time talking about how will I start and keep it going. It's well, it's the opposite in my world of a New Year's resolution, because New Year's resolutions don't never seem to come to anything, because perhaps they're not well-formed outcomes, who knows? But they are, it's just a lovely question to ask. Again, we can ask ourselves that question, but I wonder what it might be like for a coach to ask you that question and have that beautiful, lovely eye contact where we both look at each other and think, yeah, is this going to be something you're going to commit to?
Absolutely, Tim. I completely agree with you there. We all need somebody to keep us on track sometimes, somebody to be a bit of a cheerleader at times, and somebody to hold up that mirror and help us see ourselves in a different light, or the situation from a different perspective. And so that impetus to have a coach alongside you that will help you with reviewing what you're doing, will help you with seeing it from a different perspective or looking through a different lens, can be really key in the success of your well-formed outcome.
Thank you, Helen. And there should be, I think, one last bullet that's going to appear in the middle at the top.
No, I think that's it, Tim.
Oh, it's not, no, it's not. Okay. Well, there's one other thing I would add to that then. It's basically, how will I know when I have achieved it? And that's the final piece of that. So I hope that that has been helpful. It is something you can use on your own. It is something that you can most definitely use working with a coach. And it is something we're going to be making available to you. So I do really hope that you find that useful. So thank you very much for that. And I think I'm now passing back to Felicity. Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much, Tim and Helen. I really enjoyed the grounding exercise. I almost fell asleep. And it's really good to have the chance to really go through in detail the well-formed outcome model, which obviously, when you're in rapport on a one-to-one basis with a coach and a client, it's very relevant to you, and it feels quite different to sort of, if you like, the coaching on a broader scale that we've done today. So we've had a question in from somebody, and if you do have any questions, now's the time to start to pop them onto the Q&A session. So the first question was, what can I do to prevent assertiveness coming across as aggressive? So how can we use these tools to prevent assertiveness coming across as being aggressive?
So as Tim started with the well-formed outcome session, it's about putting that into a positive question around the intent that you want to have. So first of all, starting with that, so I don't want to come across aggressive, but being about, I want to be more assertive in these situations, and what it will give you, and why you would want to behave in that different way for yourself and for others. And we also talked about the different perspective and the different lens. So it can be quite difficult for us in isolation to see how we look from others, to see the impact that we have on other people. So I would say, in sense checking what's working well for you, what's not working so well, could be a really good step forward into raising your levels of awareness around what's coming across assertive and what's coming across as something that isn't as positive. Because assertive is great, it's when it tips over that edge, and it's often because we're leading with fear or vulnerability rather than positivity around the intent and the impact we want.
So as you did that, again, that sort of that focusing in exercise, and you were regulating the hormones that drive the way that you're thinking and acting, perhaps the way this person could approach that situation is to actually do that mindfulness exercise and then go into the situation that they're thinking about. Yeah.
Yes, it would be really helpful, because often, I mean, we have something called inner dialogue. So, I'm not talking, a medical problem, schizophrenia, but we often have a little voice inside our heads that is predetermining how we will act in a certain situation. Mm-hmm. So often, if we come across as aggressive or passive, it's because that little voice in our brain is going wild around, oh my goodness, that person's walking towards me and they always give me a really hard time. So I need to meet them with that And actually, if we take that breath, we take that moment to feel centered and calmed, and we lead with that more positive response, then we'll find that we'll get that back in return.
Okay.
And just to add to that, I would say that, and again, I would say this, wouldn't I, as the coach, but the one thing that's absolutely fabulous about working with a coach is that there is confidentiality in that environment, and there is non-judgment. There is an opportunity to test, when you have a great relationship built with your coach, how does this sound? What you can talk with that openness, not being judged, because as soon as a coach starts to judge you, it starts to be about their opinion of you rather than about you, which is what coaching should always be about. But there is that opportunity to try stuff out in a safe environment. So I would never underestimate the benefits of a safe environment that coaching can offer you.
Thank you. So we've got another question, and this is about, I think, about balance. So it says, how do I sustain the positivity and not derail from my outcome due to overthinking and becoming emotional rather than logical?
Do you want me to take that one? So a lot of it, again, is in the planning and the preparation. So taking some time to ground yourself. If you know that you act in a certain way, to try and analyze that. As Tim says, with a coach, they can support you in building strategies to help you respond in a more positive and proactive way. But I would say absolutely in the planning and the preparation, leading into certain situations would really support you in having a more positive outcome.
And adding to what Helen's just said, I mean, just trying to recall exactly the words using that question, and I won't get that wrong because I've just said earlier how important it is not to misquote someone. But what I think I heard in that question was someone with a very well-developed sense of self-awareness already. And one of the principles I work with, which you may well have heard of, neuro-linguistic programming, works on a whole set of presuppositions, one of which is you already have all the resources you need. Now, if you don't believe that, it won't work for you. If you do, it will. But if you can access that sense that, do you know what, I know that I might be emotional or over-emotional or whatever else, that's huge, useful information. Useful to you on your own, useful to you in a coaching environment too, because you can really explore and get underneath. So where does that come from?
And some of that is around, what does it give me in my present state? So accepting that some of these parts of you, which, can be emotional, comes from a good place. And that's the founding thing of NLP, is around good intent. So actually I might be over emotional, but it's because I really care and I really want things to go well. So if I accept that and I acknowledge that, but I think about what strategies I could put in place that are more helpful to me, then that can help you move forward.
Yeah, perfect. I also find in terms of the resourceful state, I use this very often, just sort of visualizing a place where I really got something right. So I'll share with you my space of brilliance, if you like, was presenting to a brand new team at the John Lewis Stratford City store. We opened a branch just on the edge of the Olympic Park and saw it be built. It was an amazing experience. And in our first annual general meeting, I remember presenting, and I just felt really good. I felt that I looked good. I felt calm and present in myself. I saw a smiling team in front of me, and I was able to literally look out on the Olympic Park as it was being built. And so that really helped me to not only deliver in that session, but I think it helps me now when I'm finding myself in a situation that I'm feeling out of control with. Calling up that resourceful state really helps. So in this example, the COVID-19 scenario, I found that sort of just drawing on that experience has sometimes really helped me to sort of come through that. So we've got another couple of questions around how do you advise dealing with sudden lack of motivation halfway through achieving your goal, even though deep down you want to achieve it? So that sort of dip of motivation.
I think it depends on the reason for the dip. I mean, again, if the well-formed outcome model is a new one to you, I would recommend checking in with using that as a way to sort of check in, a kind of a self-auditing process. So if that motivation is just a temporary blip, we all get that. Maybe that's no biggie. If it's something more fundamental where you're starting to doubt, is this really what I want? Is this really possible? Then actually the useful and the value of that well-formed outcome model is that you can really check, is it important to me? Might be a question you might ask yourself, that is that's what's causing that motivation to slip and to dip away. So there's something about defining, is it just a temporary blip? I'm having a bad day, I'm having a bad afternoon, I'm tired. Or is it something more fundamental than that, that I've actually lost belief in what this is all about? And depending on what the answer is, will depend upon the approach you might choose to take.
Okay.
And I'd say it's also worth considering those, those general pillars of well-being around how you're looking after yourself. So sometimes we can have dips in motivation because we're not getting out of the house enough, and I know that's difficult at the moment for many people, but could you get into the garden? Could you go for a walk? Could you connect with people on FaceTime? Are you practicing gratitude? Are you looking at the things that you're grateful for in your life? So sometimes that dip in motivation can come from the fact that we are chemically at a low point and we need to do more to build ourselves up and focus on the positives.
Okay, so we have another question, one more question, and then I just want to finish this part off on a link back to Foller's session. Somebody's said that they sometimes find it hard to finish things that they want to achieve. So I think it might be fear of failure. What tips can you offer?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. I think if I was to be working with the person who's asked that question as the client, I think I want to explore, is this a one-off? Is this something it's never happened before, you're puzzled by it? Or is it something that forms part of a pattern, that you know that this happens a few times? It's not the first time, you're not unfamiliar with it. And what's really useful, really interesting in a lot of coaching relationships is to explore patterns of behavior. It's really interesting, right down to the language that we use. And often, as when I'm coaching a client, I don't say very much at all throughout the whole session, but particularly I don't say much in the early session, part of the session, because I tend to find listening, you'll even hear patterns of language where phrases are used again and again. And picking up those phrases, because we use them subconsciously, unconsciously, people aren't aware of them, but the language we use can be driven by the beliefs that we hold. And it's getting underneath what's driving that will be the most revealing part, I would guess. It's a fascinating question, and one I feel I can't do complete justice to, because I really do feel it needs exploring within the environment of a coaching relationship, but a great thing to observe about yourself once again.
I'm going to sneak in one last question because it feels that it's come from a really important place for the individual that's asked it. And I'm going to throw it to Helen, please. So, and this could be me speaking, by the way. I promise I didn't write it, but it could be me speaking. I tend to feel guilty about things that do not go to plan. How do you stop being so hard on yourself?
Yeah, good question. We can all be really hard on ourselves at times, and then we can apply all of that guilt. And so some of it could be, well, you could assess the situation and go, I could have planned that bit a bit better, I could have done something a bit differently there. We can all learn from the things that we do, but often this guilt that we have around not doing things well enough, and then the pressure we apply to ourselves is something that's quite deeply set within many of us. And so practicing once again that time to breathe, to give yourself time to reflect, to focus on what did go well. And so often we'll look to what didn't, but focus on what did go well, and use your colleagues and your friends and family around you to help you sense check that. So to give you some confirmation and some reassurance that, yes, those bits did go well, and you should appreciate that, and you should be grateful for that, and you should recognise that within yourself. So there's lots of different tools and techniques you could do with a coach or with even friends or family that can help you look at that. There's some great books such as Strengths Finder by Marcus Buckingham, which will help you look at what strengths you do have, and so help you really amplify and focus on those, because none of us can be masters at everything. So by focusing on the stuff that we're really good at, and being assured about that can help us when we're feeling less confident about other things.
I should just mention that one of the things that Tim, Helen and I have discussed about going through this session, because we're aware that, you know, obviously you just had coaching experience and it might raise more questions than you have answers for. Obviously there is a coaching route that you can go through, but we want to also signpost for you some resources that you can tap into. So as a post session output, we'll send you something which gives you some ideas about where you might be able to go and do some of your own research if you're interested. So Grace, could we just move on to the next slide, next two slides, please? Just skip on to the next two slides. Thank you. And this one's for Helen, please.
Thank you. So often the greatest thinking and light bulb moments that we experience with our clients don't happen in front of us. They actually happen between sessions. And that's because your brain has had a chance to digest what's happened in the session and process the stimulus from the questions that your coach provides you. And so to help this process along, what many coaches such as I like to do is to set our clients a little bit of homework. And we might ask them to keep a reflective journal. We might ask them to seek feedback from colleagues, to actively test out some of the new tools and techniques that they've explored in a session. Or as I will do here, we'd like to set questions. So I'd like you, as you've attended this, to reflect upon these questions. So what am I already doing well in accessing my resourceful state? And how can you enhance it? And what might you need to develop or change to access more of your resourcefulness? And how might you do this? And you will have noticed, because I've talked about this quite a bit, the first few questions focus on what you're already doing well and how you can amplify it. And that's not by accident, because we learn much more quickly and effectively when our learning is rooted in positive psychology. So as you, I'm sure, go out and treat people with kindness and respect, give some of that kindness and respect back to yourself when you're answering these questions. So now over to Felicity to sum up.
Thank you. And if we can just go to the final slide, please, Grace. So we've taken you through some of the NLP based models today in a very short space of time. Coaching, supervision and mentoring are very, very broad subjects which pull from a range of different models, disciplines and approaches. So NLP is just one, and our coaches are talented at being able to explore and pull on a number of different models to be able to support their clients through their coaching challenges. Quality professional coaching is worth exploring carefully. Not every coach out there has these capabilities. A resourceful coach will be capable of drawing on their knowledge and expertise in a client-centric way. So basically identifying what's going to work really, really well with you, and then coaching for you, as opposed to this sort of more broad-brushed L&D type approach. L&D absolutely has its place where we're looking to train for skills and such like, but individual coaching and team coaching actually gets into the more sort of the challenging and the rigor around thinking. If you are interested in pursuing coaching, make sure you're at ease with the individual that you choose to be your coach, and that you have confidence that they will work to support and challenge you in your own thinking, not just create an echo chamber of what you want to hear. And as I said earlier, we will be supplying some additional resources for you by way of follow-up to this session. If you want to find out more the coaching offer, you can look in a number of places. Firstly, you can visit the SUMS website, where there's a link through to the Oyster Outcomes website, and on that, if you just click through, you'll see the profiles of 12 of our coaches who are available to help you. SUMS members can use membership days to go towards covering the cost of coaching, and yeah, so that's basically the route through. We've been really privileged to talk to you today, if you and just spend some time with you, and just hopefully you found it useful to just give yourself just that hour of free space to think and consider, and we hope that we've left you with some new and fresh ideas to work through this particular challenge. And just linking back, one final link, if you want an opportunity, if you haven't got a challenge that you're working on at the moment, but you want an opportunity for something that came out strongly from Foller's previous change session, lots of thought was around how we get back to work and the things that we need to put in place to actually transition ourselves back to a new normal. So if you want to pick an opportunity to test this well-formed outcome model with, I'd suggest that would be a really great starting place. Okay, thank you very much. Just handing back now to Marion to finish off.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Felicity, Tim, and Helen. That was a wonderful session to end the day on. And like you, Felicity, I left feeling, that after that grounding exercise, very calm, very zen, ready to kind of map out what my next challenge is going to be and think about how I want to achieve that. So thank you all. And I would just say to that on a personal level, I've been really fortunate and benefited from both mentoring and coaching over the course of my life and career. And both have been invaluable, really, in helping me achieve the things I want. So just to follow on from Felicity's point there about, please do get in touch if there's something that we can do to help you, because it's certainly beneficial to both the individual and I think the wider team. So on that note, I'd really just like to thank you all again for joining us for the day. We've been very fortunate in that this online technology has allowed us to open up today's sessions to colleagues in Wales, to Scotland, Northeast, Northwest, London and the South, and our colleagues at the Tech and TUCO consortia. So that's really great. That's something we may not have been able to do if we're holding an in-person event. So again, one of the benefits of change and kind of moving with the demands of the times. Just to say again that you will receive more information about our programming on the 30th, which will include a kind of procurement where are we now in the midst of COVID from Professor Albert Sanchez-Grales, and a series of other sessions to help you as you deal with sort of immediate challenges, but as you start to adapt to a more mid to long term view as well. One last reminder about our surveys coming out, so please keep an eye on your inbox for those. We would really value your feedback on how today's sessions went, what was useful, and what we could do in the future to make sure that we help you. So on that note, I will say thank you all very much for a really great day. I hope you found it useful, and we will hope to see most of you back on the 30th. Take care.